Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Our guest today is Kate Brooke, Firmwide Resource Management Leader at Moss Adams. Kate has been at Moss Adams for 18 years and has quite the tenure there. I am so looking forward to diving into our conversation about all things resource management. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I'm really excited. I think you've got a really interesting set of experiences, and I can't wait to kind of dive in. So I usually like to begin because our I would say unique career and profession that we've chosen in resource management is not, in my experience, a linear path that people just follow and just end up in resource management. So I'm curious, how did you get started in resource management? What pulled you in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. 18 years at Moss Adams is a really long time. I did not start in resource management. So I started in an administrative support position, really wasn't looking to get into the accounting space. So just kind of fell into it. And I was supporting teams, delivery teams. So getting tax returns processed, footing and proofing financial statements. And I started to learn a lot about what was going on in the office. So I started in the Portland, Oregon location of Moss Adams, pretty big office. We had about 200 employees at that time, and just got to know people, got to know our external clients, and a resource management position became available. We had someone who had been doing scheduling. They were getting ready to retire, and this position opened. And honestly, it wasn't even on my radar. And it wasn't really on anybody's radar that I was working with. We weren't sure what this person was doing, what impact they were having. But I took a look at the job description. I talked to my career advisors, and it really matched, like the people aspect, problem solving, like all of those things just matched up with what I already liked about being in the accounting industry. And so I, just said, hey, I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to take my shot and see if that works out. And it did.
Fantastic. I love that story for a lot of different reasons. One, because first off, it's very inspiring, right? Anytime you see someone that has just tried something and actually has then, now I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine enjoyed it because you stayed in the role for some time, and now you're leading it, right, from a firm-wide perspective. So I just think that's fascinating, especially because in resource management, what at least I hear, and I'm curious your opinion on this, is a lot of times people don't necessarily, well, a lot of times they don't feel like there's always a defined career path for them in this profession. And so I love that you are an example of someone that truly has had this path. Do you feel that way as well? Or do you think it's kind of a similar journey that others experience? I'm curious.
No, I totally agree with you. And I spent years of time, even in resource management, wondering if it was an actual career path and thinking like, this isn't, where would I ever do this anywhere else? I'm doing this singular job. Can I translate these skills somewhere? So I had that with myself also, but I think the challenge of the position really motivated me to keep moving. Like, things are always changing. And when I reflect upon why to stay somewhere, why have I stayed for so long within one organization? My job has not ever been the same. It's been an evolution, and that career path wasn't set out in front of me, and I had to drive a lot of that. But I think for those who are coming into resource management now, much more defined, and still a little bit ambiguous. It's both, but you can see those folks who kind of led the way and taken a path and made their own path. And I think that is very impactful for our teams.
Oh, huge. It's so, and you touched upon something that's so timely, right? There is something about not just resource management, but specifically resource management in public accounting, because I would say, generally speaking, especially historically, public accounting has been it's a very specific type of an industry, right? They serve specific types of clients, right? They're organized that way in many cases. They're organized by geography, service line, by their different offerings. And certainly there has been, I'd say, a pattern of talent pipelining, talent deployment, and even so far as to say, people retiring. We even know when they're going to retire. That's typically a standard in the public accounting industry. So on the one hand, you have this very sort of structured, linear part, but it's juxtaposed against the resource management world, which I'd venture to say is totally dynamic and very volatile, because you've got a senior that quits in the middle of February. Now you have to deal with that, or you've got different things happening from an advisory perspective. Do you, in your role and from a career perspective, have you seen that duality as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When I reflect back on it, the product we're delivering is the same in the public accounting space. Let's take tax as an example. You're preparing the tax return, you're delivering the tax return. That is ongoing. Maybe there are new rules. Yes, we're learning new things all the time, but there is a lot of consistency in that. But the way that we recognize our employees, understand their skill sets, the skill sets that have changed and ebbed over time, things that are more important now than they were a few years ago, that is the heart of what impacts resource management. So even though that one tax return product at the end of the day might look the same, the way that we get there has changed so much, and resource management's at the forefront of that, to understand what are those changes and how do we keep doing that one thing in a better way, in a more efficient way.
So true. And what you commented on there is this idea that things have evolved, whether that's from a talent perspective, a talent expectations perspective, technology, which we will get into in a bit. I'm curious, looking back on everything that you've seen and experienced, what you've had the ability to be a part of, is there a moment that sticks out to you as a really rewarding part of your career in resource management?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's one thing that always comes to my mind that at the moment I didn't take it in as, wow, that was really rewarding. But when I reflect upon it, I can see how it built up to this very valuable and rewarding aspect of my career. We had an opportunity to deploy a new workflow tool, and it wasn't a resource management tool, but a workflow tool. And there were some scheduling capabilities within the tool now, and it was deployed firm-wide, but there was sort of a concept of it's not required. It's not required for you to utilize all the aspects of this tool, but you can. So let's teach you what it is, and you can kind of decide group by group, do you think you want to, leverage this and figure out how to make that work? And so when I learned about this, I really thought about it and said, yeah, absolutely, we have to leverage this piece of this tool. Went to my leader at the time, made the case for it, and he was like, yeah, no problem. It wasn't a fight. It was just hey, I think we could do things better if we took this new approach, utilized the software in a different way. And it was, again, let's do it. It took us time to get there, to really utilize it. But when I reflect on it now, that was a turning point for our resource management team, the small team I was working with at the time, to really take that initiative and say, we're going to do something a little bit different. And I've seen that even as I've stepped out of that team and stepped into a more leadership position, the impacts that had and that has had on that team over time is huge. You can still see how that one of those teams has really kind of excelled and taken what they're doing in a new direction, and other teams had to kind of catch up. So I find that really rewarding when I reflect upon it, even though, I'm a part of the whole. It wasn't all on my shoulders, but very, very happy that happened.
That is so exciting, because you answer. So I will say I was not anticipating that answer, but the reason was because when I typically get asked a question like that, I think about a moment, a specific, maybe it was a meeting, right, where I got to present something, or something happened and it was, in that moment, you saw the light, something amazing happened, right? But I love this answer because it sounds more like a slow burn, right? It's something happens. Certainly you were a part of driving that, and you can see the effects of that and see it over time. So you just changed my perspective on how to think about success and things that are sometimes challenging turn out to be really rewarding later is the way that I see it. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious now, on the other side of the spectrum, the idea of things being challenging. Now, I have always said, and I touched upon it, this idea of resource management being, it's a challenging profession. It just is, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with the people engagement part or the actual very tactical puzzle pieces part of the profession. It's going to be challenging. I remember I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who is in a completely different field. I mean, not even remotely close to this industry. And she came clean at a certain point and said, I really actually don't know what your job is. And so I explained it to her, and I told her, I said, it's a little bit hard, honestly, to explain, right? Because it is kind of very specific. And so I told her, I was like, well, here's what I did that day, right? And I described some scheduling, staffing issues that came up, some conflicts. I talked about presenting something and delivering some messages that the leaders didn't necessarily want to hear, but needed to hear, making some decisions around just broader, impactful things that were going on from a process perspective. And to be honest, a lot of it, not through anyone's fault, but just the nature of what's being communicated can feel a little bit contentious sometimes. And I explained all this to her, and I'm getting energized talking about it, right? I'm excited. I'm like, this is what I got to do today. And she was like, that sounds horrible. Why would anybody want to do that? And so I'm curious from your standpoint, my answer has always been, yes, it's very challenging, but because it's challenging, those things that are challenging about it are in the end very rewarding, at least for me, right? That's my experience. So I'm curious, after all this time, you look back, are there certain things that are or were challenging, they continue to be challenging? You had a very interesting answer on what was rewarding. So I'm curious, what's your perspective on what's challenging about the profession?
Everything, so many things. I fully agree with you. It is challenging every day. We do this job that the people we work with outside of RM in the industry say, this is the least favorite part of my job, thinking about resourcing, thinking about scheduling, but it is energizing. The problem solving, the difficulty, the challenge, the conversations. I think those things are what kind of drive me to keep doing it. Also just the change, constantly changing, constantly trying to do things in a different way. There isn't one answer. The puzzle doesn't have one solution only that you can just replicate. Like, we don't have a guide book for that. I think something today that challenges me more than anything else is the conversation around administrative asks and administrative tasks. And, resource management should be taking administrative tasks off of our engagement team. So that's something where I find probably the most frustration and challenge as I have those conversations today, because, engagement management is important, and engagement managers and resource managers need to work closely together. And you have to tell a resource manager when your job is going to be ready to start, and who you need, and what skills, and how long it's going to take. And that's not an administrative burden. And it's a really valuable conversation for me, because I think what comes out of that sometimes is, how are we as RM positioning the asks of our people? We cannot be doing things inefficiently. We have to be really efficient with what we ask them to do, and how we explain it, and how we describe it, and hear their feedback when it isn't efficient and when they aren't loving our approach. But that I find so challenging these days. It's just, yes, there's the drive for efficiency, for people to be effective, but it's a partnership. And we aren't here to engagement manage your work. We're here to help you accomplish that.
Yeah, here's what I think is actually so interesting about what you just said, because the first part of that, 100% agree with. And the reason I agree with it is because I have experienced it. I would venture to say anyone at any level of resource management, probably across any industry, has also experienced that, right? So I'm not surprised to hear that. What I was surprised to hear is this second piece you said around, how are we positioning the way that we communicate this? And so that's actually a bit more exciting, because what you're what you're essentially setting the stage for is we can control part of that narrative, right? And I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about that because, and I will try not to hijack the entire rest of our conversation around this topic, but if you can see, I'm a little passionate about this because I think it really reflects broadly on the perception of our profession, of our role as resource managers in the industry. And I think let's dissect this because I have this idea that sometimes resource management is strategy wrapped in admin's clothing. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking you said something that we've been talking a lot as an industry, right, collective around this is frustrating, but you said something. So tell me about that. Have you done some reflecting on that, how we're positioning it, or have you seen that? Is there something that you've been able to do, take action with that?
Yeah, I definitely have been reflecting on it because it comes up so often and because it sounds so initially frustrating to like position resource management as this administrative function only. And our job is only to do data entry. And that is not our job. That is definitely a part of our job. But what I think in my reflection is, am I really listening? Like, how can we really listen to what that feedback is? Because I don't think the feedback is, I want you to do the data entry for me. I think the feedback is, maybe it's you're sending me a spreadsheet and you're asking me to fill it out. And this isn't an efficient way for me to be communicating this information. Or you're asking me to perform this task and I don't have time to do that. Is there a better way? You're not asking me if there's a better way. You're saying this is administrative and it's burdensome, but listening for like the words underneath the words of why is this coming up and really trying to get to it. I think I've seen that reflection help make progress and kind of poke at it a little bit more. So, my first instinct is that is frustrating to hear. And we're so much more than that. And maybe I want to stop engaging in that conversation with you when you're telling me all I do is an admin function. But how I've tried to flip it is like, tell me more, like explain to me what that is. Am I really overburdening you with this?
It's so interesting, right? When you say that, because I will show you. So anyone who's listening, we're only on audio, but Kate and I can actually see each other. So I'm holding up a Post-it note. I just wrote that down. Listen to the words behind the words. I love that. That is really, really actually great advice for those of us, especially I would venture to say who are on the front lines doing the staffing, because that's who's getting hit, right, with those requests primarily, I would think, right? It certainly was for me when I was in that role. And I remember, to give an example, let's bring to life what Kate just described, the words behind the words. I was probably, I would say, a little annoying, to be honest, because a partner would come or a manager would come and say, hey, send me an availability report. And I remember my counterparts were like, partner's asking for a report, get the report, get it quick, send it over. There's an ask, let's fill it, right? And I remember I was always like calling them and I was like, why do you want an availability report? Like, I'm going to send it to you. I'm not going to not give it to you, but you're asking for the availability report because you are looking for an available person for something. What's the thing? What's happening? Have a conversation. And at first, if I'm being honest, it was probably a little bit like, why is this woman asking me all these questions? I asked her a very simple thing, but over time, it gets down to the bottom of something. You learn a little bit of something, right? And again, let's be very clear. I'm not suggesting leaders come to you and you do not send them the thing that they're asking for, like disclaimer, not what we're saying on this podcast. However, I do think there is room for curiosity and also taking the initiative to feel comfortable to ask those questions. But what I think is really interesting is I just thought of something as you're describing this idea of the words behind the words. I think sometimes that is difficult in the moment for people to recognize the opportunity, especially if you are working on 12 different open needs. You've got people breathing down your neck for something else. There's other reports that need to be run. And in that moment, it might be difficult to think to yourself, hey, this is an opportunity to ask some questions, right? But so timely that we're talking about this today, because I like to talk in analogies. So I have young, very active, very, I'd call it imaginative children, little boys. So as you can imagine. And so I have a 3-year-old. I was just kind of doing something in the kitchen and I saw him walking past he said, oh, can I have a stool? And I said, I'm thinking to myself, yes, right? Like, can you have a stool? Yes, there's a stool. But of course, I'm thinking, well, I'm not just going to give you the stool, right? Because you're asking for this thing because you're planning to do something with it. And it's probably something dangerous. It's probably something I don't want you to do. It's definitely something that's like against the rules. And it's the same thing, right? Someone's coming and asking you for, let's say, an availability report out of the typical process. And you really should be asking yourself, right? Like, why do you want that? And get into that conversation. So rather than viewing it as being annoying, I would view it as, look, I'm the mom in this situation. If my kid gets hurt because he's climbing on something, it's going to be a real big problem, not just for me, but for him and everybody else, that's involved. And so I would challenge resource managers actually to look at it that way. It's, if you're just letting everybody have all these different things and letting them go wild with the process, actually, at the end of the day, is that not eroding the process? Is that what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think you're right on. And I think it brings it back to that administrative and strategic conversation. If you're just giving the stool, you're just doing the administrative piece of that. If you're just giving the report and not thinking about it or thinking, why are they asking for it? Is there something else I could help them with? Would a different report be better? What exactly is it that we can provide? If you're just like, and agree, you have to give the report. We have to provide client service. We have to, we can't just say no and say, explain to me why. People don't like that, but there is a way to provide people with that one piece. You asked for this, and let's open the conversation up for what else could I do? How else could I help you? Take it from just administrative to a more strategic approach.
So true. And we are on this idea, right? Administrative to strategic. Let's talk about that from a career perspective, right? So you elevated in your role. Now you're in this firm-wide leadership role. How'd that happen? Tell us about that. Did you have a master plan and every year you would do something different? Did it just fall into your lap? Tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it was evolution within the organization. So evolving the function of resource management from, an office or location-centric function to a regional function to a line of business function and, focused on different areas. And because of my long tenure, I was able to kind of go through that whole journey and understand where is the organization trying to go? How can I adjust my approach to fit the needs of the organization? And I think always having that mindset of, maybe I have a good process that's working today, but could this process work if I had twice as many people to resource, or if I had 3 times as many clients that we had to schedule? And I think having that always in my mind, has helped me keep my mind open to innovation, open to change, open to thinking of different ways that might work in the future that sure, we may be comfortable today with what we're doing, but it won't be for tomorrow. So evolving from office to regional leadership, getting involved across regions. And then as the organization was evolving, those leadership positions started to become available as we started to say, we need organization around resource management, not just at the regional level. We need someone to help drive process and help drive, career paths for the resource management team. And so as those opportunities became available, I was absolutely interested and, just kept engaged with leaders I worked with. I really believe in, thinking about where it is that you want to go and telling somebody and asking somebody for something, even if it doesn't exist. So I can think of multiple times when I went to the chief people officer that I was working with before we even had a resource management leader role and said, I would really be interested in doing this and being involved in this if it ever becomes an opportunity. And I have done that throughout my career. And so I think that, along with just staying really engaged, helped me get where I am, has helped other leaders get into positions within the organization as well.
Oh, that's huge. I'm going to point out for everyone who's listening, this is the number one, in my opinion, and I have a lot of opinions because I talk to a lot of people in this area. This is the number one challenge that I have seen people in this profession have, which is a lot of times I think it's human nature to look for this special secret sauce, right? It's what's the thing I have to do to get this other outcome? And the reality is a lot of times it's not there. You have to create it, right? So you just give us a masterclass in doing that, right? So it's not necessarily going to just fall into your lap. Sometimes it will. Sometimes there will be opportunities, but you have to take the initiative. You have to have that little bit of drive, that little bit of hustle to kind of say, look, I have envisioned what this could be. I'm going to paint the picture. And by the way, and the most important step is now I'm going to ask for it. I'm going to put myself out there. And it is a little uncomfortable, right? But what I would say is there's a lot of very successful resource management leaders. They have totally different approaches, many different industries. I would say not a single one of them has the same personality, except they have that in common. So what you just said, I think is really important. And I was going to ask you, so I had a list of questions in my head, many of which I've completely thrown out the window at this point. But one of the questions that I had for you was really going to be around how did you, as you progressed in seniority at your organization, what did you learn from that in terms of how to keep progressing? But I'm not going to ask you that question because of the way you answered the previous one, which is this, you said innovation. I think innovation is part of it, but I almost think it's a mindset that you just described around, specifically, you said, well, what would happen if we had double the amount of resources to resource? Those are the questions that people should be asking themselves, right? Because especially in this industry, and I would venture to say, especially today in what's happening in the industry, public accounting is transforming dramatically, right? This is not the same industry that it was 15 years ago. I don't need to tell you, right? There's all kinds of changes, right, happening right now. And we're seeing a lot of, right, private equity investment and all kinds of disruption. And so I would say, not to, scare anybody, but I think the reality is unless you're going to start thinking that way, you're going to have a hard time.
Absolutely. You're going to have a hard time succeeding in your role because your role is going to change. You're going to have a hard time mentally showing up for work every day because you're going to be really uncomfortable with what's going on if you don't start to think about that. And you might have the best process that works. You might have the best relationship with the people you work with, your team, your leaders. It is going to change. Like, it is going to change. If you haven't already gone through it changing, you will. And so get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Love that. And it's true. And it's really true. Speaking of uncomfortable, there's a lot of change going on in this industry, in this world. We just talked about that, right? From a public accounting perspective, growth, transitions, transformation, all those buzzwords. In your experience, what is it really like when a firm goes through these major changes, right? And here's the reason I'm asking this question. So anyone who's listening has been through some type of a change. I don't care the size of your organization. I don't care, right? Like what industry you're in. Change is a constant. Dramatic change, though, is sometimes really significant in terms of your career, in terms of how people are feeling, how people are doing, what their roles are going to be. So you've got a lot of growth happening. There's a lot of restructuring happening. How does that impact, in your opinion, the role of resource management? And I think you have a little bit of a unique perspective because a lot of times, and I'll use myself as an example, right? I was I was at Baker Tilly for a number of years leading resource management, and certainly we had change during that time, right? A lot of M&A activity, and I had not been at Baker Tilly my entire career, right? So was I embedded in the process? Absolutely. Did I have a strategy? Absolutely. But I was riding that wave as the wave was happening. So you have a different perspective, right? Because you've seen almost from start to finish what this is like. So what are your thoughts around that?
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, to say the least. I think even though I've spent much, if not most of my career at Moss Adams, our organization has changed over time, and it has changed consistently. And the firm I started working for 18 years ago is not the same as the firm that I was working at 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago. So I think it has been a constant evolution. And I think where we're at today is the next evolution of that. And what I am trying to stay focused on is the stability of our function. Regardless of how people may change, clients may change, but resource management needs to remain stable. We have to have the best, most efficient processes that we can. We have to have our team feel stable, but be able to project that out to the people that we work with, because without external clients, we don't have people, we don't have an organization, and we are at the heart of that, making sure that our jobs are resourced correctly. And that, I think there are more eyes on that than there have ever been across so many organizations. So just really focusing in on stability. What are the best processes, best practices that we have? What do we need to be thinking about to bring it into the future? And who do we need on the team to help us get there?
Yeah, right. Like what do you need to make that happen? I love that. I heard something once that was so eye-opening for me, and I try to think about it whenever I'm dealing with these barriers, right? And to be honest, I even think about this in my personal life. So it's this idea that something's not working, you don't have the right, whatever it is, you don't have maybe it's financially, maybe it's you don't have enough people, right? There's all kinds of reasons why something can't be done. And it's this idea of, well, what would it take to get it done, right? So it's not, here's what I have and I can't do it. It's what would be needed. And maybe it is more people, or maybe it is X amount of money. But the thing about it is then at least you have something to work toward, right? And I love that. I think it's such a really good reset. And at least it gives you something a bit more tangible to focus on instead of just focusing on what can't happen. So I think I hear you, on that piece and connecting those dots. And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. Now, you mentioned process. Huge. Could not agree more. Let's talk about technology. You led a major tech rollout. That's a lot. What advice do you have for someone who's about to embark on that type of an implementation? And by the way, for our listeners, I know many of you are in this situation, so don't be shaking in your boots. Kate she's gone through it. She's still with us. So what do you have to say to those people that are either in the middle of it or bracing for that change?
Oh my gosh, it's a challenge. It might be one of the more challenging things that you go through if you're in the middle of it or if you've gone through it. I think attitude and perspective are really important. So maintaining a positive attitude, maintaining a really open perspective, thinking about that art of the possible. If you are going through that type of technology change and you're only focused on replicating what you've been doing in the past in a new tool or technology, that is not how your mindset should be. You really have to keep an open mind. And I also think you have to understand you're never going to make everyone happy. One technology tool is never going to meet the needs of everyone, and be prepared for that. It's easy to say, and it makes sense. You say it and you're like, yeah, of course. But then once you get those first few feedbacks of this is terrible, why did we do this? You can't internalize that. You have to just listen, try to understand that perspective and accept like, yeah, no, this was never going to please everyone. So, and that's okay. It still can be successful.
Well, so what I heard there was stay strong, right? That's the message at the end of the day. And look, that's how things are naturally anyway. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better, right? That's how things work. You got to power through. You don't give up. You don't give up at the first sign of a challenge. Now, there's the change management part of that. There's all kinds of other things, right, going on there. But you commented on, I'd call it the people aspect, right? And it's a big aspect, especially when change is rolled out. I would actually venture to say too that even if it's not technology related, just in terms of the regular day-to-day resource management process, who's engaging in it, who's not engaging in it, maybe the way that they're supposed to. In your view, what role does resource management play in that people experience, right? The employee experience, the development or positioning of their careers. Tell me about that.
I think it's essential. I think you have to be closely connected to your people. Going back to, we need clients. We need people to do that work. The happier that our people are, the happier that our clients are going to be. Like, it creates a virtuous cycle, and how people are focusing in their careers, what opportunities they're getting, how do they feel about their workload. All comes back to resource management. And we have the ability to make a huge impact on the experience of people that has an impact on the entire organization. So I think it is absolutely vital, that connection. And resource management isn't HR. So we have a different position that we can take with people to help them through challenging situations and to try to find where they fit the best within an org. And maybe they would be uncomfortable saying something to a partner that they're really comfortable saying to resource management that we could have an impact on. And so I think it is vital. The moment that people start to feel like they are not valued for what they can bring to the table and what they have to offer, they start disengaging. And we can't have people disengaging when we have work to be done. We want to continue to grow and expand. So resource management can be that bridge between, I think, in so many ways.
Oh, I have witnessed that, right? It's not just talk, right? I've seen that. I think many of us have seen that. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that's the part that makes it rewarding for many of us. It's seeing that part come together. I don't think it's the spreadsheet. I think it's the effect, right, that we see. And that to me is the real strategy, right? Like, that's like the heart of what we're doing. Now, keeping all of that in mind, we've talked about a lot of different things. We have a lot of areas, right, that certainly that you've experienced and lots of things going on in the market. Let's talk about the future, the next chapter.
Yeah.
So we talked about the disruption. We know that there's a lot going on. Based on what you have experienced, and you have been through quite the evolution, right? Even in your own career and what you've seen externally and what's happening in the market, what do you think is going to happen in terms of how resource management as a profession is going to evolve, right? Because there's a lot of market shifts that are happening. How is resource management going to have to adapt? Do you have any predictions, any trends? What are you thinking about for the future?
Yeah, there is quite a lot. I think we've seen an evolution of resource management already. I think it's only going to continue to increase, be part of the conversation, especially as organizations grow larger or more complex. Like we really have to have certain things dialed in for us to be able to grow and to continue expanding. I think that skills, we always talk about skills, right? The ability to really truly understand what's needed, understand and analyze not just utilization, realization, all of these terms, but where are the skills gaps? Where do we need to focus on hiring? Where could we really elevate the experience of our external clients by having the right people in the right positions? I think for our day-to-day resource management, I do think technology is going to come along and help. I think there's really exciting things happening. Recently reading about KPMG and how they're leveraging AI with their recruiting team so that questions can be answered around the clock. That doesn't take a person out of the process. It just helps to digest all of that information. And I could see that on the horizon for us as well in a way that could really make what we are doing more meaningful while providing a meaningful experience for people. They're not waiting around, waiting for an answer, that they feel like they're being acknowledged and taken care of. So I think that will help. And even going back to that concept of administrative, of the tasks that we have to do, I think that is really evolving also. I think we will see a big shift toward strategic resource management as we move forward, and the value being, we always have known the value is in the strategic part of resource management, but seeing organizations agree with that and understand that if you don't know how your work is being assigned, you have a huge problem. If you don't have control over that or controls in place around that, you are losing touch with what is going on in your organization. And I think it's going to just continue to be a highlight.
Absolutely. What you just described really resonates with me, and quite frankly feels really spot on at this point, right? Based on all the things that we're seeing. But it's also exciting. It's super exciting. Ending on a high note there. We have had such a great conversation, but I have to get into our next segment. This is our quick rapid fire wrap up. So we end our this season anyway. We're ending with 2 questions. The first is, what is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
I think it is that it's better to try something new and to fail than to keep doing the same thing.
That's a powerful one.
Yes, it's one of those things that, I've had people in my profession, partners that I've worked very closely with say, and you hear it and you go, okay, great. Yeah, sure. I'm going to just run out and try something new so that it fails. But it has become a lot more meaningful over time.
So good. Last question. Can you share with us a mistake that you have made at some point in your career? Could have been earlier in your career, could have been yesterday, and what it taught you?
Mistakes all the time. So large and small. I think if you're not making mistakes, you're not acknowledging that you're making mistakes. So little ones, right? Like, how are we interacting? I've put a delay on my emails that are sent just to make sure I have an extra minute to maybe I need to go back really quickly. I've learned over time that it's good to do that for myself. And I think related to that piece of advice that I received there, I don't know that it's a rookie mistake, but I had a situation early on in my resource management career where I was in a meeting with my business leaders and a regional leader, and we had a disparity in our utilization across 2 different lines of business. And we were talking about strategies and what we could do to reconcile that. And, he just really approached me and said, we should be cross assigning people in lines of business, like that, like as if that was the simplest, like easiest. How did you not come up with that? Now, from a practical standpoint, would anyone have gone for that? Absolutely not. But, important to just be coming up with ideas and sharing them and throwing them out there, because when you aren't, and when if I'm not speaking up and saying something, there's a perception that, I'm not thinking of those things, and you have got to be always problem solving. So I learned a lot from that interaction. If a managing partner saying we should just do this, and that sounds real serious, if I had said it, he might have been like, that's the wildest idea I've ever heard. Absolutely not. But just a really good experience for me, I think.
It's great advice. And you actually touched upon, I don't know if you meant to, but you touched upon that earlier. It sounds like you have internalized that mindset of innovation, right? And creativity in certainly your own career. Well, great talking with you. That was such a good conversation. With that, we will go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed this episode, please help others discover our show. So follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Resource Revolution.